Hello everybody, welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be doing something special. We're going to be going over an entire project. The project is going to be my latest release, and I think this would be very interesting to kind of show you the thought process behind the whole production instead of just one trick or one sound design, sound or stuff like that, which I normally upload. So instead of that, I decided to go over the whole track, kind of give you all the little ideas that kind of go into making a full production. And I hope this is going to be a little bit of a longer video than normal. I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of the things than that I usually do. And this is going to be from my latest release, as I said, which unfortunately is still not up on Spotify and iTunes and other streaming services. My distributor is having a little bit of trouble with that because of the coronavirus. They are experiencing a lot of traffic to their website, as well as less manpower to actually handle that traffic. So therefore it's still not available on those streaming services. If you want to anticipate the release there, you can still follow me on Spotify or iTunes or stuff like that and wait for it to come out. Otherwise, if you don't want to do that, you can also go to my YouTube channel and you'll find the entire track there as well. It is the latest track that's on my YouTube. And it's also on my SoundCloud, which there should also be a link in the description if I remember correctly. But without further ado, let's just get into the project and get started. Alright, so I kind of want to go over the template setup of the project, of every project that I do. If you want to see a full overview of the template, that's also on my channel. If I remember, I'll put a link in the description. If I haven't done that, you should comment down below and let me know that I can do that, so that I remember. So yeah, let's get into it. We have 6 tracks here, or 6 groups I should say. We have the drums, the basses, the leads, the pads, the effects and the vocals. And this keeps everything nicely organized. Everything is colored differently so that I can see instantly what something is, and when I hear a sound that's kind of off, I can immediately open up the group in which I know it's going to be, and that makes locating a particular sound a lot easier. So all of these tracks go into their own return track, and that's where I do all the analyzing. So I have these analyzers here which open up like this, and each instance adds an instance to this thing here. Again, I have explained this in that arrangement or in that project overview tutorial thing for the template. And I also have one on the master track, which I can use for references and stuff like that. And this all goes to my master out, which is a track up here where I do my mastering. That way my reference track isn't going through my mastering chain, and it won't get remastered again and therefore overly compressed or overly distorted and stuff like that. Instead, it will go out directly to the master, where it only goes through the analyzer and an optional filter, which I most often have turned off, or an optional limiter I should say. So I'm actually going to open up this reference track here because I want to show you something interesting. I started this track off not really knowing what I wanted to do. I had some cool sounds like the bell sound in the intro and some cool pad sounds that we'll get into. But I didn't really have a structure or plan for this track, which is fairly odd, as I normally kind of have a structure in mind when I want to start it. So what I did is just dragged in a reference track that I liked and just wrote down the structure here with this marker track, which is the bottom one here. And throughout the creation of this track, I kind of followed that structure, and whenever I felt like it, I started to deviate from it, and then I make the adjustments on my marker track here, which shows the actual structure of the track, where we have an intro, a pre-drop, we have some actual drop, we have fill elements, we have breaks, we have longer breaks and more fill and drops. So each color kind of represents a different element in the structure, and that's how I keep track of the structure. It kind of helps you locate where you're at the timeline at all times, and you can just close it up and have that sit on top of your actual song stuff, which is really useful. Alright, so let's get into the sounds now. I'm going to play you the drum sounds, and I want you to notice how minimal and how basically general it is, in the sense that there's nothing really interesting going on here. It's just a drum loop. So with the philosophy for this track is having the drums do the minimal amount needed and really have the lead sounds and the effects and the vocals and all the pad textures and background elements really come to life through that, and therefore kind of go back on all the stuff that's happening in the drums, so no crazy fills, no stuff like that, and really make this a more synth heavy and sound design heavy track for me. So something interesting I ran into for this particular project is that I had a lot of trouble adding the filter to the kick. Normally when you do filtering on a kick drum or on a bass drum, you introduce some phase issues, and for this track in particular I had really big problems where the phase issues were just so uncontrollable that what I decided to do is anytime I wanted to filter the kick, I decided to put that on a separate track so that my main kick wouldn't be affected and I didn't have to deal with that problem quite as much as you would normally do. So that's that. Other than that, we have some hats and claps here. We have two different crashes. This one is kind of doing a little bit of a fill thing. I think it's only happening once. No, it's happening twice. You have another one here, as you can see. And then we have one reverse crash here, kind of doing the transitional work, which it would normally do. And for the bass, it's basically very simple. Again, we have two different groups. We have the one where I'm actually filtering the bass, and we have the main one. Now I normally don't do this, so I really don't know why I decided to go with this approach. I do know that it still sounds good, and I'm going to let you listen to the kick and the bass on its own, and yeah. Fairly decent kick and bass. The bass sound, of course, is made up of two elements. If you have ever seen me do streaming or stuff like that, and working on tracks, you know that I like to split up my kick in the offbeat or the bass in the offbeat and the onbeat part of it. You can see that where the kick is, we have this MIDI clip, and where the kick isn't playing on the offbeat, we have this other MIDI clip on a different track. So what's happening here is that for this first hit here, what I've done is I've removed all the sub from it, as well as the second harmonic. You can see that there's no information here, and therefore it's kind of working like a high pass, and therefore the frequencies between this part of the bass and the tail of the kick don't clash, because there isn't any frequencies to clash with. So that eliminates that problem, which I often see people dealing with. So that's a trick you can use there. And then on the onbeat, it's just my standard patch, which is also on my channel. I believe I've covered it. And yeah, this is it. Not really much going on. I don't think this compressor is doing anything. And yeah, that's a very simple thing, bass patch here. There's not really, as you can see, no processing after that. We have an LFO tool here, which is just to kind of shape off the tail and make room for the kick. Because there is a little bit of processing on it, there is going to be some phase stuff going on and some post ringing, which could be in here, which you just want to cut off so that the click of the kick can really come through, and we have a cleaner kick and bass that way. So again, very simple approach here, and that's what I kind of wanted to show you as one of the parts of this track, is that the kick and the bass and all the drums are very, very simple, and that way I have more space to work with the leads and to make them more complex sounding, for that way that they are the more interesting parts of the song. I have a little list here which I wanted to kind of go over. I think I've covered everything so far for the drums and the bass. There's not really much more going on. So let's get into the lead sounds actually. Now this, as you can see, is where it gets interesting. There's a whole bunch of processing going on this thing, and you can see a lot of automation here. And this is the main lead sound of the very first drop here, which sounds like this. I'll play it from here. Now you can hear that there's a lot going on here and that there's a constant movement through it, and it's always producing a slightly different sound. So let's quickly go over the patch actually. As you can see, we have two waveforms. One is being FM'd by the other. This is the carrier, and then this is the modulator. This modulator is turned down obviously, and then that goes through a bandpass and through a hyper dimension, a phaser, and a compressor. And the real trick is with what I've set up for this envelope 1 here. As you can see, we're modulating the sustain by LFO2. What that does is it kind of brings the pluckiness of the sound down and up throughout the progression, which again helps with the movement. It makes it sound a little bit longer and shorter than again. We have some other things happening with this envelope 2, which is doing the pitch, giving it a little bit more click. And then with this one, we're adding some gain to again make it a bit more plucky sounding and kind of really get that snappy feeling. Then we have this LFO here, which is modulating the resonance of our bandpass. Now you can see this bandpass is doing something weird. It's actually turned down on the mix a little bit, so it is more like a bell curve than an actual bandpass filter. That way you kind of keep the high end and the low end of your sound in there without having to compress it too much, which we didn't want because that would take away the pluckiness of the sound. And as you can see, I'm modulating a whole bunch of things. I have set up a few macros here. Macro 1 isn't actually doing anything at this point. Throughout the sound design process, sometimes I decide to kind of change it up, make it a whole, take it in a whole different direction. And what I had previously assigned, I just don't want that anymore. And then instead of removing the automation, I just remove the modulation here so that I still have the actual automation if I want to use it for something else. So that's the tip there. If you're sound designing and you don't quite feel the sound, just get rid of some of the modulations within the synth, but keep the automation so you can assign it to different things if you choose to do that. Now the power of this sound is really the automation that we're doing. As I said, there's a lot of different things going on. I'll quickly open up all of these different automations here so you can see what's actually going on. It's gonna take a little while. And then macro 1, we don't have to open it up because that's not doing anything. Oh, so let's quickly go through this. You can see we have some cutoff movement here, which is kind of determining the actual sound, the frequency content where that boost is coming in that we showed off earlier. We have the phaser dry wet being automated like this, which kind of adds to that second half of the sound here. If we listen to this loop, you can really hear that the second half here kind of benefits from that phaser a lot more. Then at the end here, at the end of each 4 bars, we have the sync coming in. We have macro 2 doing some other stuff. I'm not exactly sure what that does, so let's quickly take a look. Macro 2 is just changing the wavetable here a little bit, giving it a bit of a different tone, I guess. It's been a little while since I've worked on this project, so forgive me for that. We're also modulating wavetable A here, as you can see, to kind of get a different tone there too. And that still adds a lot more to the movement. Again, with the same idea that we have this constantly evolving synth sound that's just on top of it and really carries the song in these parts. So that's the main lead. We kind of are backing it up with some squelches here. Now I have two groups of squelches. I wanted to filter these in different ways than I wanted to have this one, and this also has some different processing on it as well. So the first ones sound like this. If I can actually make it. You can hear very faintly. They're not constantly playing, but they're fairly loud in the mix, so they kind of add to specific parts of the song here. And then we have this second one, which is actually playing the sequence here. You can also hear that it's in a lower frequency range than what the other ones are doing. This one barely has any high end, and therefore it's more suitable for these sequence type feelings, so that it stays a little bit more in the background and adds to the rhythm a bit more than just being like this overpowering element that this is a little bit more. Of course, it's still under the main lead in the mix. And then finally we have this backing lead here. Now this backing lead is a little bit special, as it was originally playing parts of the sequence that this lead is playing, but I since then completely changed this sequence. So now it's just kind of in there playing its own little thing, and it sounds like this. We can quickly go over that, and let me see what I did here. We just have two wavetables going through a bandpass filter, and they're being played at different octaves. And then there's some processing. We have the hyper, the soft clip, we have some chorus for some stereo effect, and then we're compressing it and adding some reverb. So there's really not much going on in here other than the wavetable just getting that right tone through the bandpass. Yeah, so there's not really a lot going on in terms of sound design, no interesting modulations or stuff like that. It's just a cool sound that's kind of sitting there in the back and giving it another kind of cool element to listen to. So that's that. With the same idea, I wanted to talk about this ARP here, which is sitting in a fair bit of the track. As you can see, we have it being part of the break, part of the intro. It's also part of the first drop here. And it sounds really cool. I really like this sound. It's actually a preset, and I'll get into using presets in a little bit because I have a different, better example that I wanted to show you. But as you can hear, we still have that constant modulation or automation kind of feeling here. We're automating a whole bunch of different parameters. We're modulating the high pass as well as the low pass in some parts. We have some different filter cutoffs here, two different ones. One is for the first block and one is for the second. We have the filter resonance and filter drive, which in some places just kind of kick in. And we have this effect with the delay, for example here. Which just kind of acts like a fill in there. You can hear it sitting in there and just kind of bridging the gap between this first part of the drop and then the second part. It just kind of sits in there in the background of these vocals and adds another cool element to the track. So yeah, that's what I wanted to cover with this arpeggio. Now there's a whole bunch of other sounds that aren't really that interesting. What is interesting is what happened with this bell. So this bell was the whole inspiration for the track, and somebody actually asked me to do a tutorial on this, and I don't feel really comfortable doing it because it's a preset that I used and not something I designed myself. And this is where I want to talk about using presets and why I sometimes think it's a very good thing to use presets, and why you should have a lot of presets is because if you're not inspired to work on a track, it's very easy to just go in and sound design and stuff like that, but you'll never find that inspiration. Whereas with a preset, you can just stumble upon it. You don't create a sound, so you suddenly are confronted with a sound that you really like and you have an idea for, and then you can start to use it. So that's what happened with this particular sound here. Now, if you haven't heard the track, the bell sound sounds like this. So it's a very cool sound. It's from the Futurephonic presets pack, which I use a lot. There's some cool macro capabilities here, which I used. As you can see, I automated a few of them, as well as some other parameters. But the main thing for this sound was that it really kickstarted the track and really drove home an idea for me, and it allowed me to build all the other elements of at least the intro around it. And then from there I started work on the drop and kind of the theme with the vocals and that kind of stuff. So there are some other background elements we have, for example this 4-man lead, which I've shown off before. We have some other plucky sounds, which is actually fairly cool. This works with M Transformer, which I've shown off on this channel before. A really cool plugin to kind of take any frequency and put it anywhere else on the spectrum, and through weird curves on this plugin you get that weird, if you look at the spectrum, it's almost like there's a lot of very small bands all being played together, but that's what this plugin just kind of does. You can see that there's a lot of weird harmonic spikes there which don't really make sense, but the sound itself is very, very cool, and it has this glassy texture almost to it. So then we kind of go to the pad sounds. We have a normal one, which is something I made, I think. Yeah, just a very simple pad sound to kind of set the background for. And then again, with the same mentality, we have this very cool sound, which I actually didn't make myself. I think this is also from the Futurephonic pack. Oh no, this is just from a Serum standard pack. And it sits on there and it does some cool things. Kind of sounds very, very old. And of course, as you can see, I soaked it in delay and reverb, and that really gives us a nice background texture for the track to sit on. And this again was something that really inspired me to write down this entire intro sound here, or the entire intro for the track. Again, it's very useful to have some elements in your track which, instead of you having made them there yourself, they kind of just come to you in a way. So that's the pads. It's really not that much interesting stuff going on. I wanted to talk about the importance of these background elements, which of course you can hear without the pads. If we listen to the intro, it just sounds kind of dull and there's not really much happening. And then with the pad sounds, it sounds a lot cooler. So you can hear that adds another dimension to the track and really helps it standing out. So then there's the effects. These are mostly just for transitional stuff. We have some risers, we have some downlifters here from noise. What I like to do is just take a Cashmere sample and then put a auto filter on it on a very steep, very high resonance bandpass, which kind of creates this cool bandpass sound here. Which really helps kind of make it stick out a little bit more in the mix. We have some tonal impacts for the start of the track, which I haven't really used anywhere else. There's a nice tone to it, which was really useful to layer with that bell sound, which kind of had a similar tone. And again, with the same mentality that if you find something that really inspires you to work on a track, again, just throw it in there and use that to really kickstart the idea. Finally, I want to talk about the vocals. There are some cool things going on. This was in the time where I really liked recording my own vocals, and as you can hear, it doesn't really sound like me. It has a whispered kind of feeling to it, which I really enforced through the processing. So this is what they sound like on their own. You can slightly hear that it's me, but if I turn the processing off, you can really hear that it's just me whispering stuff. I'm surrounded by shadows. I can't see anything. Which is fairly cool that you can do that with this kind of processing. So let's quickly go through it. I started off with just kind of cutting out the frequencies that I didn't want, doing some cuts to kind of get out the resonance, and I did this high pass to get rid of most of the noise from my actual recording equipment. There's still a lot in there, which kind of adds to the sound in a way. It kind of gives it a bit more high end for that noise than you would normally have if I would take that out through processing. So I decided not to do that. Then we have some dynamics, which acts like a de-esser, and that's very useful to kind of get your higher end in line with the rest of the sound, so that there's no big peaks out there before you go into the actual processing. Now the bulk of the processing is happening here. As you can see, we are doing some stuff with the variate knob here. We have the smearing on, we have the pitch shift, the formant shift, and very importantly, we're actually using a slight curve here in this transformation. So what's that going to do is basically turn everything up by a few hertz in frequency. It's not really that much. As you can see, 250 hertz is going to go just above 500 hertz. So it's slightly going to double it here, but it's going to be less and less influence the more up you go, because of the fact that this is logarithmical scale, and this is actually just one-on-one scale here, or linear scale I should say. So the high end isn't really going to be affected a whole bunch by that. Then we have this harmonizer, which is also doing a lot of things. Now this is just a preset that I really like. I've shown this off in a tutorial where I cover psychedelic vocals, and this also adds a lot of width because of the fact that it detunes the left from the right channel by 1.07 semitones. So I didn't really dial this in myself. This is probably just what came with the preset, and I just threw it on there and didn't really worry about it. It sounded good enough to me. Then we have some further EQing and some stereo processing, and then finally we have some ambience here as well as a sidechain. There's not really much going on. The whole processing part is just these two plugins turning the whispering of me into a sound that doesn't really sound like me at all. We also have another version which is a little bit different. Well, it uses the same concept actually, but in a slightly different way. This is the harmonic vocals that are sitting in the drop, which sound like this. I believe I actually retuned this in here. Yeah, as you can see, it's plus 12 semitones. So I recorded myself and then tuned them up by an octave. So you kind of get this chipmunk kind of voice almost. And then we use the harmonizer. Again with the same preset. Here I actually changed the width a little bit. And I also set the dry wet down a little bit. Oh, you can see that. I set the dry wet down a little bit here. And then we're using M transformer to basically pitch it down again. So that kind of adds the artifacts of the plugin into it, as well as allows you to have M harmonizer work with a different spectrum, which is then going to be pitched down, which adds a cool effect to the whole thing. And I also believe we might have, yeah, as you can see, we have slightly turned down the dry wet, so the octave above signal is still coming through in a little bit, but not that much. Then we're doing some OTT to kind of compress all of it and get it all in the same dynamic range. We have some EQing after that, and then finally some delay, which turns on at certain times. We have the same for this one. I just like to turn on the delay at the end of the sound, so only the last part of the sound actually repeats, and we don't have this whole mess of delay. behind it. And then finally we have the reverb and the sidechain. So the So there's some other stuff going on. We have some reverse sweeps here. What I do is I take the sound, put a really long reverb on it, render that out, and then reverse that reverb sweep into the sound, which kind of introduces the sound before it actually plays, which is a really cool trick. And then finally we have this thing I recorded a long time ago. This is actually my vocal, or my voice just saying something like ah, and then being processed in a very weird way. As you can see, this is just a sample. I just made, I make stuff like this in a session. I do like 2-hour sessions, kind of like stuff I do on stream, where I just make a whole bunch of these sounds and then throw them into, like, for example, this thing, or I have some other folders on my PC where I have samples like that. And then finally we have me breathing into the microphone, and that sounds like this, which kind of adds a whole new thing to kind of the pre-drop here. And again, the same type of processing with M Transformer. This is just turning it up 7 semitones. It's a little bit of an alternative way than just to repitch this sample inside here. And then we're going through the harmonizer, which uses a slightly different preset. We have the power chords, and normally I use power chords adaptive. For some reason this didn't really give me the right result that I wanted, but switching it to normal power chords did the trick. So yeah, that's basically all the interesting sounds in the track. We can quickly go over the master chain, which is a fairly normal chain for me. It first goes into stereo processing, which you can see I use the exciter quite a bit, as well as dialing in some different excitement, as well as widening settings here. And I'm finally doing some global widening as well to really get a nice wide image. Then it goes through the dynamics, which just kind of keeps every frequency in its own check and kind of does a final coloring of the sound before it goes into the limiter, which is just there to drive the sound and make it really loud so it's nice and danceable. So that's everything I wanted to talk about for this project. It's a little bit of a longer video. As I can see from my recording, it's about half an hour long. If you like these longer videos, let me know by leaving a like and subscribing. That indicates to me that you enjoy the video. I use that metric a lot to kind of gauge what people like and what they don't. And if you're new here, again, subscribe. There's a lot more content coming out, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.